I still remember that summer in Ohio. The air heavy with heat and hymns, the sort of air that glued your shirt to your back before noon. My mother said the church camp would make a man out of me. I was 16, uncertain of what kind of man she meant. The camp sat by a lake fringed with cattails and willows. Each morning, bells rang across the water calling us to prayer, the sound as bright and cruel as the sunlight. I'd never felt at home there. The other boys carried themselves with easy laughter, while I was always the one trailing behind, book in hand, unsure where to stand when everyone else knew the words to the songs. That's when I first saw him, Jeffrey, leaning against the oak by the volleyball court, half in shadow. He was older by a year, broader in the shoulders, and carried a quiet that unsettled people. When he smiled, it looked as though he'd borrowed the expression, unsure if he had the right to keep it. Our paths crossed properly that evening. The counselor had paired us to stack firewood behind the chapel. The sun was sinking low, staining the sky tangerine. We worked without speaking at first, passing logs from one to the other. His hands were rough, splintered at the edges. Yet when they brushed mine by accident, I felt something electric, small, almost imagined, but enough to make me drop a piece of wood. He laughed softly. "You all right there?" "Fine," I said far too quickly. "Just tired." "Guess we both are," he murmured. "This place sucks the life out of you." That was how it began. Humor as camouflage, shared sarcasm against the piety that weighed on us. At night, after lights out, we'd whisper across the narrow space between our bunks, voices barely louder than the frogs outside. He'd talk about wanting to leave Ohio, see a real city, somewhere no one cared who sat beside you at Sunday service. I'd tell him I wanted to write stories, though I never admitted what kind. The nights stretched longer, the air thicker with something neither of us could name. We found excuses to linger. Washing dishes after others had gone, helping fix lanterns, walking by the lake after prayers. Once, during one of those walks, a firefly landed on his wrist. He cupped it in his palm, its tiny light pulsing between his fingers. "Looks trapped," I said. "Nah," he whispered, opening his hand. The insect rose, glowing as it vanished into the dark. Sometimes you just need to hold something a moment to know it's real. I didn't realize he was talking about more than the firefly until much later. When the summer fair came to town, the camp took us there as a community outing. The streets smelled of popcorn and engine oil, and colored bulbs strung between the stalls flickered against the dusk. Jeffrey and I slipped away from the group, claiming we wanted to see the Ferris wheel. We ended up in a quiet patch behind the rides, where the music thinned and only the crickets kept rhythm. He bought 2 lemonades, handed me one, and said, "You ever think about what it's like somewhere else? Where no one knows you?" "All the time," I replied. He studied me then, really looked, his eyes catching the fairground lights like shards of gold. "You're different," he said. "Not in a bad way. Just you don't belong here." "Neither do you," I wanted to say. Instead, I asked, "What makes you think that?" "Because I don't either." The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. Somewhere, a bell clanged from a ride, children shrieked, and the world spun on. But between us, everything went still. His hand brushed mine again, lingering this time. I should have moved. I didn't. The distance closed, breath by breath, until the scent of lemonade and sawdust blurred, and his mouth found mine brief, trembling, terrifying. The kiss was nothing like the ones in films. It was clumsy, urgent, full of wonder and fear. When we pulled apart, I could still taste sugar and lightning. He laughed, quiet and shaky. "Guess we're both going to hell now." "If it feels like that," I said, "maybe it's not hell at all." We didn't see the shadow until it moved. A shape at the edge of the fair lights, broad shoulders, a hat pulled low. Jeffrey's father. "Jeffrey!" The voice cracked like a whip. "What the hell are you doing back here?" Jeffrey froze. I stepped back, heart thundering. His father's eyes darted between us, suspicion sharp enough to draw blood. "Get in the truck," he ordered. "Dad, now." I wanted to speak, to explain something that had no words, but my throat locked. Jeffrey's gaze met mine one last time. Pleading, apologetic, already fading. Then he turned and walked toward the lights, swallowed by them. That night, his bunk was empty. By morning, the counselors said he'd been called home for family reasons. No one asked further. In church, the minister spoke about temptation and cleansing fire. The congregation nodded, murmuring amen as if it were rain washing sin from soil. I stared at the lake instead. Its surface held the sky like a mirror, the same way his eyes had held me that night. I kept waiting for the sound of footsteps behind me, for his voice carrying across the water. But all that came was the bell, calling us to prayer again, each toll like a closing door. I learned later that Jeffrey's family had moved north to Milwaukee. No address, no forwarding number. He was gone as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving only the ghost of a kiss and the ache it left behind. That summer ended the way all summers do, with rain and goodbye hymns. But something inside me stayed lit, a stubborn little glow that refused to die, no matter how much the world tried to smother it. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see the fairground lights flickering in his hair, the fireflies rising like sparks around us. And I wonder if somewhere he remembers that moment too, the one that made us both realize what we were, long before we had the courage to say it aloud. Time, I discovered, doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it loops back, whispering the same name you've tried to forget. The years after Jeffrey left were colorless. I finished school, went to college, and became what the world wanted. A respectable man with a quiet life. By 1972, I was teaching literature at a small secondary school outside Columbus. I rented a modest flat above a bakery where the smell of bread rose through the floorboards every morning. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Every morning, I put on my tie, straightened my papers, and played my part. Mr. Collins, the students called me, though sometimes when one of them smiled a certain way, I'd hear Jeffrey's voice instead. The echo was cruel and kind all at once. I wrote to him often at first, long, stumbling letters about books I was reading, about the lake, about how quiet Ohio felt without him. I never knew where to send them. Milwaukee, someone said once, but that was all I had. So I kept the letters stacked in a drawer under my socks, bound with string like a secret. I told myself one day I'd post them all at once, though I knew I never would. The world outside was shifting, but not kindly. Newspapers ran stories about men being dragged from bars, about degenerates being fired from government jobs. On Sunday mornings, ministers thundered from their pulpits about sin and disease. Even television joined in, stern men in suits warning that people like us were sick. I'd sit on the sofa with my tea, listening to those broadcasts, pretending I didn't understand who they were talking about. I laughed when others did. That was what was expected. I learned early that survival sometimes looked like silence. To the world, I was polite, hardworking, and, when the occasion demanded it, courting. I went to dances, held hands with girls I felt nothing for, and smiled on cue. A few kind souls thought I was shy. The truth was simpler. I couldn't bring myself to kiss anyone when I still felt the ghost of another mouth on mine. One night, a colleague, Margaret, invited me to dinner. She was kind and clever, and I wanted to want her. After the meal, she leaned in to kiss me. I let her, but the taste of lemonade and sawdust flashed through me so vividly that I pulled away. She smiled awkwardly. "You're trembling, Richard." "Just tired," I said. The same lie I told Jeffrey years ago. There were days when I tried to forget him. Days I buried myself in work or in poetry, teaching my students about Shakespeare's sonnets without letting them see what those verses really meant to me. But memory has a way of seeping through cracks. Sometimes, while grading papers late at night, I'd glance at the window and swear I could see him standing there, older, distant, watching. I'd close my eyes, and the vision would fade, leaving only the rain tapping against the glass. Then came the winter of 1978. I was walking home through the snow when I stopped by a newspaper stand. The wind tore through the headlines, flipping pages like restless ghosts. One caught my eye, not for what it said, but for a single name buried in the text. Local man Jeffrey H. volunteers at Milwaukee shelter. My breath caught. It had to be him. I bought the paper, clutching it all the way home like a relic. The article was small, barely a paragraph, but it spoke of a man dedicating his time to helping the poor, soft-spoken and hard-working. No photograph, but I didn't need one. I read his name over and over until the ink blurred. For the first time in years, I dared to imagine him alive and well, maybe even happy. The thought frightened me, because if he was happy, what did that make me? Weeks passed. The paper sat on my desk, folded to that single column, a quiet ache in newsprint. Life went on around it. The headmaster announced cuts. The students prepared for exams, and the world inched closer to another decade. But something in me had shifted, like a clock that had begun ticking again after years of silence. That spring, the rain came early. The skies over Ohio never seemed to clear, and I found comfort in the gloom. I just settled into an evening of marking essays when there was a knock at my door. 3 soft raps, hesitant, uncertain. I opened it, expecting a neighbor, and nearly forgot how to breathe. Jeffrey stood there. Older, yes, but still unmistakably him. His hair was shorter, darker, his jaw set in a way that spoke of years lived hard. But his eyes, the same amber shade I'd memorized in another lifetime, met mine and held. "Hi, Richard," he said, rain dripping from his coat. "You going to let me in?" For a moment I couldn't move. My mind flooded with every letter I'd written, every prayer I'd whispered into the dark. And now here he was breathing the same air again. "Of course," I managed. My voice sounded small. "Come in." He stepped past me, leaving puddles on the floor. The scent of rain and something faintly metallic clung to him. He looked around the room, at the stacks of books, the papers, the single armchair by the fire, and smiled faintly. "You made it, teacher, just like you said." I tried to smile back, but my throat tightened. "And you're alive." "Barely," he said with a soft laugh. "Milwaukee wasn't kind, but I'm still here." Silence stretched between us, filled with all the words we hadn't said for a decade. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. He turned toward the window, then back to me. "I read somewhere," he said quietly, "that you can't ever go home again." Thought I'd test the theory. I didn't know what to say. The years fell away in an instant. The fairground lights, the kiss, the look on his father's face. Everything came rushing back with such force I thought I'd drown in it. I stepped closer before I could think better of it. "You shouldn't have come." "Probably not," he said, smiling the same broken smile I remembered. But I couldn't stay away anymore. The rain drummed harder against the window. In that sound, something inside me cracked open, the part that had spent 10 years pretending I'd forgotten. I realized I never had. Jeffrey met my eyes. For a second, neither of us spoke. The fire popped, thunder groaned, and the past and present blurred into one electric, trembling moment. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But the distance between us vanished like mist, and when he touched my shoulder, it felt like coming home to a place I'd been searching for in every face since he left. Outside, the storm gathered, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone. The 1980s arrived without ceremony. Just another calendar on the wall of my classroom. Another winter fading into spring. But for me, life had already split into before Jeffrey came back and after. He never really said he was staying, but somehow weeks turned into months. He found work at a garage on the edge of town, fixing engines, his hands always streaked with oil. I kept my job at the school, and together we built something that resembled a life. Quiet, hidden, fragile. He'd come over after dark, when the neighbors' curtains were drawn and the town had gone to sleep. We'd sit by the fire, drinking coffee and talking in low voices about nothing in particular. Books, the weather, the strange, endless news on television. Sometimes he'd rest his head on my shoulder, and I'd feel the tension in him melt for a moment. Those were the hours that felt like breathing again. But daylight had other ideas. In the mornings, he'd slip out before dawn, before anyone could see. I'd watch from the window as he crossed the street, his coat collar turned up, his footsteps fading into the mist. Then the church bells would begin their solemn ringing, low and hollow, reminding me that every happiness we had was borrowed time. For a while, we convinced ourselves it was enough. We told each other that love didn't need to be seen to be real. But secrecy has a way of curdling. One evening, as rain hammered the windows, Jeffrey stood before the mirror by the door, tying his shoes. His reflection looked like a stranger. Same face, same body, but the eyes were hollow. I came up behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay tonight," I said quietly. He shook his head. "People will notice." "Who cares what they notice?" "You should." His voice cracked. "You've got a job, a reputation. I'm not going to be the reason you lose it." I turned him to face me. "You're not the reason. The reason is the world we live in." He laughed bitterly. "That's easy for you to say. You still believe." He left before I could answer. The door shut, the rain swallowed his footsteps, and I was left staring at my own reflection in that mirror, the same look of fear staring back. We tried again and again. Some nights were full of quiet joy, reading poetry aloud, the words soft and dangerous. Other nights were spent arguing over the future we both knew we couldn't have. Once, I found him standing outside the church in the rain, staring up at the bell tower. "Do you still believe in God?" I asked. He didn't look away. "I believe in something, but I don't think he believes in me." The bells began to ring then, heavy and endless. I wanted to reach for him, to say something that would break through that wall of guilt he'd built around himself. But all I could do was stand beside him and listen. The sound filled the air, each toll a confession neither of us dared to make aloud. The months blurred. The rain never seemed to stop that year. My lessons grew mechanical. The students' faces blurred into one another. Every night, I waited for him, and every night the clock ticked louder in his absence. When he did come, he was quieter, restless, haunted. He started drinking more, sometimes showing up smelling of smoke and whiskey. "Long day," he'd mutter. "Nothing worth talking about." But I saw the shadows gathering. The way he'd stare into the mirror too long, tracing his reflection like he was searching for something he'd lost. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night to find him sitting by the window, just watching the rain. "What are you thinking about?" I'd whisper. "How would it feel to stop pretending?" He'd reply without looking at me. "To walk into town with you, to not care who sees." My heart ached. "Someday." He turned, eyes dark. "You don't really believe that." I did, or I wanted to, but hope felt like a luxury we weren't allowed. It happened on a Thursday. We'd argued the night before, over nothing and everything. I'd begged him to stay, he'd accused them. The next day, he didn't come by after work. I waited, pacing, checking the window every few minutes as the rain poured harder. By midnight, I knew something was wrong. At 1:30, a knock. I opened the door to find him standing there, drenched, shaking with anger and exhaustion. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Out," he said. "Thinking. Drinking. Doesn't matter." I reached for him. He flinched away. "Don't," he said sharply. "You don't get to make this better. Jeffrey, please." He slammed his fist against the wall. "I can't live like this. Hiding. Lying. Pretending we're just, what? Friends? I see the way you act at school, the way you smile like nothing's wrong. You're ashamed of me. That's not true. Then tell someone. Tell the world. Tell your precious church. See how long they let you keep your job." His words cut deep because they were true in ways I couldn't bear to admit. Fear had kept me silent. Fear had made me small. And he saw it. "I'm trying to protect us," I whispered. He looked at me then, eyes full of tears and fury. "Maybe I don't want to be protected anymore." The rain outside roared like applause. He turned, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Anywhere that's not here. Please don't do this." He paused, hand on the doorknob, then said without turning, "You'll be fine, Richard. You've always known how to disappear." And then he was gone. I ran after him, barefoot into the rain, but the street was empty. The church bells began to ring somewhere in the distance. Slow, mournful, as if marking the end of something holy. Their sound carried through the storm, echoing down every street until it reached me, standing alone in the downpour. I looked up at the sky, water blurring my vision, and for the first time in years, I didn't pray. There was no point. The rain would fall, the bells would toll, and the mirror would always show me the same thing. A man who'd loved too quietly, too carefully. The first time I saw Jeffrey's name again, it wasn't in a letter. It was in a newspaper headline. Local man arrested in connection with series of murders. I remember staring at the ink until it bled into the paper. The type seemed to swim, the words breaking apart before they reached my mind. Jeffrey Caldwell. The same eyes I'd once watched catch the glint of fireflies now staring back at me from a mugshot, hollow, cold, unrecognizable. The Ohio air that autumn was bitter, and so was the silence that followed. I stopped showing up to church, avoided the teacher's lounge, and started drinking my coffee black, as if punishing myself for ever having known sweetness. Took weeks before I could read the full article. The crimes were brutal. The victims, men. The tone clinical, moralizing, cruel. And threaded between the facts, there it was. The subtext everyone in town already whispered. He wasn't just a killer. He was one of them. I'd spent half my life trying not to be one of them. I'd hidden behind my classroom walls, behind novels and essays and smiles that never reached my eyes. But Jeffrey had been the one who showed me that love could feel like sunlight, even if it burned. And now, that same boy had become the darkness itself. I started writing again. Not lesson plans, not sermons of morality, but memories. It began as a single page, he loved fireflies. Then another, he never liked the sound of rain, said it made him feel like the world was crying. Before long, my small study was filled with stacks of notebooks. Pages covered in fragments, sketches of faces, scraps of dialogue from summers long gone. Every time the church bells rang in town, I wrote faster. Their echo carried me back to those nights we hid under a single sheet, the bells calling for prayer while we tried to believe what we had wasn't a sin. But now the bells sounded like a toll, not for faith, but for memory. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to him. Why didn't you write? Why didn't I? The mirror in my room became a confessional. I'd stare into it, half expecting to see his reflection beside mine. Older, broken, with that same sad smile that used to say we'll be all right, rich. But we weren't all right, and part of me wondered if he ever was. When the trial came, I didn't attend. Couldn't. I read everything instead. The testimonies, the cold, detached reports, the sentences that carved his name into infamy. There were moments when I saw traces of the Jeffrey I knew between the lines. The boy who drew stars in the margins of hymn books, who believed every scar told a story. The world saw a monster. I saw a man crushed by his own reflection. A man who never stopped fighting what he was told to hate. Could I have saved him? That question still haunts me. Maybe love wasn't strong enough to save anyone in those years. Maybe the only thing love ever did was leave its mark. Soft, invisible, but permanent. In the years that followed, I finished the memoir. I never showed it to anyone. I titled it The Fireflies Still Burn. Inside, I wrote not of Jeffrey the criminal, but Jeffrey the boy who once dared to hold my hand beneath a summer fair sky. The boy who whispered that love couldn't be wrong if it felt that right. I wanted the world to know that before the headlines, before the hate, before the silence, there was light. And on nights when the rain fell hardest, I'd sit by the window, pen in hand, and whisper into the storm, I still see you, Jeff. I still see the boy you were. Because love doesn't die. It just becomes a ghost. One that refuses to stop haunting you. I never meant to see him again. For years, I'd convinced myself that the Jeffrey I loved had vanished, buried under the weight of headlines and horror. But when I read that he'd been sentenced to life, something inside me refused to rest. It wasn't closure I wanted. It was truth. So one gray morning in 1994, I took a train to the state penitentiary outside Milwaukee. The journey felt endless. The sky pressed low and colorless against the glass. Every mile took me further from the man I'd tried to become. The teacher, the neighbor, the polite recluse, and closer to the boy who'd once stood trembling in the light of a summer fair. When I arrived, they led me through corridors that smelled of bleach and despair. The sound of clanging doors echoed like distant thunder. A guard said his name, Caldwell, and my chest tightened as if my lungs had forgotten how to breathe. Then he was there, older, gaunt, eyes dimmed but still recognizable, like embers struggling to stay alive beneath ash. For a long time, we just looked at each other through the glass, the phone between us trembling in my hand. "Richard," he said, voice rough, fragile. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," I whispered. "I couldn't let it end with silence." He laughed softly, not cruelly, just tired. "Silence is all that's left, Rich." I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that the past still breathed inside me, that somewhere between the sermons and scandals there had been a kind of holiness in what we shared. But the words felt too small for the distance between us. "Did you ever think," I asked, "that maybe love wasn't the sin they said it was?" Jeffrey looked down, his hands shaking. "I stopped believing in love the night they took me away from you." There was a long pause. The fluorescent light above us buzzed faintly. I could see the scars on his wrists, pale against his skin, and I thought of the boy who once swore he'd never let the world break him. "I did terrible things," he said finally. "There's no excuse. I don't even know who I was anymore. But when they said I'd get one visitor, I hoped it'd be you." Tears blurred the glass between us. "I don't forgive the things you did," I said, "but I forgive the boy you were." His eyes closed. "That's more than I deserve." For a moment, the years folded in on themselves. We weren't two men in a prison. We were 16 again, standing beneath the fairground lights, pretending the world was wide enough for us. "Do you remember the fireflies?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I chased them so you'd look at me." That was the last time I saw him. Jeffrey died in his cell 2 winters later. They said it was pneumonia. No family came for the body. I asked for permission to claim what little he left behind, a stack of letters he'd never sent. Most were addressed to me. I burned them on the beach behind my cottage, one by one, as the tide crept in. The smoke rose like ghosts into the wind. I watched it all drift away. The guilt, the fear, the years of silence, until only the sound of the waves remained. Now I live quietly by the sea. I teach no one. I write every morning until the light turns gold, filling notebooks with everything we were never allowed to say. Sometimes I hear the church bells from the town nearby, faint and far away. They no longer sound like condemnation. They sound like memory. People would call him a monster. Maybe they're right. But I've learned that monsters aren't born. They're made from loneliness, from shame, from the hands that push love into the dark until it rots. I still keep one photograph of him, tucked between the pages of my manuscript. 2 boys at a fair, laughter caught midair, a blur of lights behind them. It's fading now just like I am. But every summer, when the fireflies return, I leave my window open and watch them drift across the field. Their glow flickers like tiny heartbeats, fragile, fleeting, alive. And I whisper the line that's been waiting all these years to be written. Even monsters were once boys chasing fireflies.